Great. And if you have any questions throughout, just go ahead and put them into the chat and I can answer them at the end. We're going to go over a lot of information today and a lot of jargon, so I might end up answering a question as we're going through because I'll bring up a few things. So we'll save time for that at the end, and you can also unmute then and ask questions, or if you just want to type it out, I can answer it that way too. All right, so let's dive in. This presentation is by the Campaign for Historic Trades. It's about our apprenticeship program, and it's geared towards existing or prospective training and education programs that might fit into it. If you're interested in becoming an apprentice or hiring an apprentice, we also have information sessions for those that you can sign up for. And then we'll also be recording, so you can watch some of those recordings in the future. Right. So my name is Natalie Henshaw, and I'm the director of the campaign. And we're going to go through today. Here we go. We're going to talk about what the campaign is, what we do, why we're doing this, about the apprenticeship system in America, how it works and functions, about our specific apprenticeships, how you can participate in them, what the program looks like forward, and then why use the system, and then we'll open up for questions and discussion. The Campaign for Historic Trades is a dynamic national workforce development program to expand, strengthen careers in the historic trades. It's made possible through a partnership with Preservation Maryland and the National Park Service's Historic Preservation Training Center. The campaign is a program of Preservation Maryland. We are an independent organization, but we do work at a national scale, even though we're with a statewide nonprofit. Our vision is for all tradespeople to have clear career pathways, accessible education, and secure employment. The way we do this is primarily through the apprenticeship program. It hits a lot of the goals to achieve those things in our mission and our vision. So number one in what we do is apprenticeships. It helps us build curriculum, partnerships, training, helps recruitment, advocacy, and all the connections that we want to build. In our apprenticeships, we're registering with the Department of Labor. We're building the curriculum necessary for it. There's some of the gaps, and you need education as a component of the apprenticeships. Building partnerships, we want to work with stakeholders to support preservation trades programs, associations, and businesses. They're vital to apprenticeships. We develop statewide and national historic trades training opportunities available to everybody. Recruit and promote for preservation trades programs and careers. Advocate for historic trades training. And we want to lead the national movement to strengthen and expand historic trades careers. So let's dive into specifically this number one point, the apprenticeships. And I want to talk about how the development came about so you understand where we're at in the process and what it might look like in the expansion of what we have currently too. The Department of Labor is an employment first mindset. There are a lot of training and education programs that identify a skills need and build towards that. The Department of Labor identifies an employment need and builds towards that. What we first had to do was then assess, what does the employment market look like? Anecdotally, we all know that there's gaps and there's tradespeople needed, but what are those specific jobs? How many are needed? What is the training needed for those jobs? Historic trades careers were difficult to actually calculate because if you look at Bureau of Labor statistics, it's all within construction data. So trying to extrapolate what the historic trades was within that data and spread across a whole bunch of different occupations was pretty difficult. But it's one of the first things we did in partnership with Place Economics was this labor analysis. And you can find the full one on our website too to get some of that information. It projected that 100,000 historic tradespeople are needed by 2030. What I mentioned about construction labor, this was correlated with historic tax credit data, which is one of the few reliable data points we had about historic preservation needs. That said, not every tradesperson works on a historic tax credit project. So even this number, I do want to couch it in that it's an underestimation based on the available data. There's definitely more of a need, and we just don't have a reliable number for it. After getting that, we evaluated what were the top needs, and also who were the most willing and ready partners to build apprenticeships with us. We wanted to work with those industry partners because, as I just mentioned, the historic trades are multiple different occupations, and there are multiple different trades associations and schools that focus on different aspects. We didn't want to rebuild or reinvent the wheel, pardon me. We wanted to use what was existing and bring it into the fold. So that's when we got into the building part. What the training plan looks like for an apprenticeship is called a work process schedule. We'll get into that in a few slides and what all is contained within there, but that was what is developed for each occupation and is submitted to the Department of Labor for approval. It is based on those position descriptions. So we had to find employers who were interested, willing, and able to hire apprentices and help us build what those training plans look like, those work process schedules. The Department of Labor would then look at the training plan and the position description to assess, does this training plan result in a journey person of this position description, somebody who's competent to work independently and train new apprentices. We went back and forth on that for a while with a few different ones and figured out what were these actual occupations that were needed. We thought at first preservation technician would be one, but then gathering information from employer partners and assessment of the Department of Labor, they said, no, this is really a preservation carpenter. And so that's what should be built from these position descriptions rather than preservation technician. That said, there's still be a role for a preservation technician. We would just need, that from an employer to build first rather than us thinking it's out there. Then we strategized. That was part of the working with the stakeholders I mentioned earlier and industry partners. What was already existing that could build towards the education and training components? What schools were already a part of it? What businesses can be a part of it? What programs can already be a part of this structure? And then we submitted this to the Department of Labor. Once all of those drafts were done, this last step took about a year of back and forth on a lot of the nuances on selection process, minimum qualification requirements, all that type of paperwork that was needed. So that was just 1 year alone. We got approval from the Maryland Department of Labor. We also submitted to the Federal Office of Apprenticeship to get these approved as guideline standards. I'll get into that structure in just a minute. But that was just 1 year. This is all about a 2-year process. Some of this took place because we weren't an approved program yet. Now, as an approved program, we can kind of start here in the process. So if there's an identified occupation that's needed, we can start building that work process schedule and then go through that submission process, which will be faster as well. As you can see too, we're just at the beginning of the implementation phase. So this next year is really going to be figuring out the best methods to work with partners, employers, and apprentices, and refining the processes that we had planned out. But now we need to adjust based on what actually is happening on the ground. So let's then talk about the Department of Labor. I mentioned a few of these terminologies earlier. So let's talk about what that looks like. In the United States, apprenticeships through the Department of Labor are called Registered Apprenticeship Programs, RAPs, RAPs. They're a formal and structured training initiative overseen and recognized by the Department of Labor. A parallel would be schools that are accredited by the Department of Education. They need to assess the curriculum and the outcomes to say, yes, you can get a degree. With the Department of Labor, they accredit these training programs, and at the end, somebody gets a certification from the Department of Labor saying they're a journey person in that occupation. This probably won't be too relevant to education and training programs, but it is good to know, and it could be relevant in terms of incentives. The Department of Labor has 2 structures in the country. One is the federal system. So that's the Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship. The Office of Apprenticeship is a federal agency with standardized documentation and data systems. And then the state apprenticeship agencies, those are recognized by the Office of Apprenticeship, but they're state employees and state-based systems. On this map here, you can see it's about half and half in the country. The light blue is the Office of Apprenticeship, the Federal Office of Apprenticeship. The dark blue is state apprenticeship agencies. So if you're working in your state, you need to know which one it is. that you can use and what incentives can be there. For us, we're based in Maryland. Sorry, I'm trying to get my cursor. There we go. I'm based in Maryland, and our program is based in Maryland. So we use the Maryland Department of Labor. To get registered, we first went through them, and then we got approval by the Federal Office of Apprenticeships that could be used in other states if somebody wants to use that for their own program. So that's the Department of Labor structure, this top tier here. Now let's talk about how we interact with the Department of Labor. They oversee these programs, and programs are registered by the sponsor. In this case, that would be us. The campaign is a sponsor of a registered apprenticeship program. We submitted these work process schedules and apprenticeship programs to the Department of Labor, and after approval, we administer and maintain them. We keep up the reporting to the Department of Labor, and we coordinate with partners and resources. In this system, we are never the employer of apprentices. Instead, we work with employers, and they're called participating employers. So rather than us employing apprentices, we work with multiple employers that agree to hire apprentices as employees and provide that on-the-job training and that instruction necessary for the apprentice. And then the apprentice is the employee of the employer. They apply to our program and we help connect them to the employers. And once they're employed, we all three sign what's called an apprenticeship agreement, stating that they are in the program, they're going to be a registered apprentice, the employer will provide that on-the-job training and education, the apprentice will live up to the standards, and we submit this up to the Department of Labor to register that apprentice. And then ongoing, we report on their progress. So once the apprentice completes, they get their junior person certificate. Where training and education programs come in are over here on the wings. There's two categories. There's a provider of related instruction and a pre-apprenticeship program. And this is used some of the terminology that we'll get into in the next couple of slides related to the work process schedule. Provider of related instruction. These are education programs that can deliver the classroom learning needed for an apprenticeship. These are approved by us, the sponsor. They're added into our standards and then put into the Department of Labor for approval. So the sponsor approves, and then the Department of Labor approves that approval. A pre-apprenticeship program are training programs that can provide on-the-job hours. These are just approved by the sponsor, and the Department of Labor has some best practices for pre-apprenticeship programs. Essentially, pre-apprenticeship programs simulate an apprenticeship on-the-job learning experience. We'll get into all the components in a few other slides too, but those are the distinguishing parts. One is more on the related instruction, one is on the job hours. So let's talk about the apprenticeship structure, because that gets into how these programs can relate in. Notably, it contains 6 key elements. First is on-the-job training. This is working alongside a journey person as an employee in a real work environment, getting hands-on experience and practical skills. It is literally on-the-job training on the job. Related instruction. This is that classroom learning. This is instruction that supports and augments their on-the-job training. To compare these two, one would be learning how to read a blueprint, understanding the legend, the pages within, how to find these different schedules. On-the-job training would be using those blueprints. So you're on the job using blueprints, applying it to your job and your project, understanding what you're doing on that project. So one gives you the knowledge, one gives you the implementation of that knowledge. The duration, a certain set amount of time to become skillful in an apprenticeship. This is usually taken on the average of a novice to a journey person. Mentorship. Apprentices are supervised one-to-one by a journey worker who guides them, provides feedback, and ensures they progress in their training. You can have one apprentice to one journey worker. You cannot have two apprentices to one journey worker. That is not an apprenticeship. Anything more than that is not an apprenticeship. That becomes a classroom. You can, though, have one apprentice to four journey workers. Some of the higher risk apprenticeships actually do require a higher ratio with journey workers for their apprenticeships. Wages, there's a wage progression, and apprentices are paid as employees of the employer. And lastly, certification. Once they complete their training, they get a journey person certification in that field. The work process schedule I mentioned earlier contains these elements. And what we'll do next is go through what our work process schedules look like and see how that can integrate with some of these existing training and education programs. First, it describes the occupation. What does somebody do in that occupation? Next is the term, that duration. How long is the training? Then the wage schedule. Each occupation has wage rates that are averaged from the participating employers. Once an employer signs up, they say, I have this many journey workers and here's the average wage rate. All that comes together to give that occupational average. And then apprentices are paid percentage of it as they progress through. On-the-job learning. So these are the competencies an apprentice should obtain on the job and the estimated hours to obtain it. This outlines what an apprentice should do, but not how they should do it. And I'll show you what that means in just a couple slides too. And these are the hours the apprentice is paid for as an employee. The related instruction, for every 2,000 hours on the job learning, a registered apprenticeship program requires a minimum of 144 additional hours of related instruction. And I do want to clarify, because I talked to somebody the other day, when we say hours, these are literal contact hours, this, time hours. These are not credit hours like you would see with a college, where a credit hour means so many contact hours. So when we say related instruction, it's 144 contact hours. Related instruction hours and on-the-job hours cannot overlap. And an apprentice is not required to be paid for those related instruction hours. It's up to the discretion of the employer, though. And these classes and providers are approved by us, the sponsor. Okay, so let's get into our three occupations that we have currently, and I'll walk through those components of the work process schedule. First, we have a deconstruction technician. That's somebody who unbuilds structures partially or fully and salvages as much viable building material as possible. Historic window technician, clean, maintain, repair, preserve, restore, rehab, reconstruct, and deconstruct historic window systems and units using hand and power tools and equipment. Preservation carpenter reconstructs, restores, rehabs wood structures by performing work on elements such as structural framing, rafters, doors, windows, floors, staircases, trusses, and beams, interior and exterior trim, and roofing. Now let's look at the wage schedule for each of those. Deconstruction technician. The average journey worker rate is $18 an hour. And there's two scales here that you'll see. Referencing back to that state office and that Office of Apprenticeship. The state of Maryland approved this as a 2-year program, so 4,000 hours. The Federal Office of Apprenticeship approved it at 1 year, or 2,000 hours. In our program with us as a sponsor, it's still a 2-year program. If somebody wanted to start their own program and use those standards, they could do it at a 1 year. So I've included both, but I think it's also important to see those percentages next to them. This is a percent that the apprentice should be paid of this hourly wage. So when they start, they get 85% of that $18. After 1 year in our program, they go up to 90%. This is also an average. It's not a requirement by an employer. So if an employer paid $20 an hour, then that's okay too. If they're paying $9 an hour, we would not approve them as one of our employers because that's not equitable. So it's a guidepost, but it's flexible because there's so many differences in project types, cost of living in different areas, employer types. So these are guidelines rather than hard and fast barriers and rules. Historic Window Technician is a 3-year program. So every 2,000 hours, it increases by 10% of that average journey worker rate. Preservation Carpenter is 4 years, again, 10% every year. These will change as we get more employers, so the average rate will end up adjusting over time and keep fluctuating. On the job hours, we have structured these in different categories. They can be flexible between different occupations. So as we add on occupations, we can keep these categories, but those competencies within them can flex based on the occupation. I'll explain the categories first and then show an example of those competencies and those tasks. So as you can see here, we have our 3 occupations, the number of hours, and it breaks down how many hours they need in each category over their time in the apprenticeship. Historic preservation fundamentals. For the deconstruction technician, 1 year it's 200 hours, 2 years 400 hours. Historic window technician, 250. Preservation carpenter, 500. Construction fundamentals varies. Safety rules and practices also varies. Building systems, same. Material skills, and project and business management. So those categories are going to be the same across each different occupation, as well as for our related instruction. But as I mentioned, those competencies change between each of them. So let's look at building systems to show what I'm talking about, those competencies changing. For a deconstruction technician, they have 1,000 hours that they need to spend in building systems. Those 1,000 hours will include unbuilding a structure, including roofing, load-bearing, non-load-bearing walls, masonry, floor systems, fenestrations, electrical and plumbing systems, as well as building structural strapping, embracing structures for safe unbuilding. By comparison, historic window technician, those hours of building systems will be maintaining, preserving, restoring, rehabbing, reconstructing, and deconstructing historic window operating systems, boxes, and sashes. And preservation carpenters will maintain, preserve, restore, rehab, reconstruct, and deconstruct historic and modern flooring systems, staircases, framing, cladding, rafters, decking, trusses, beams, doors, windows, trims, and molding. Category is the same, the tasks vary. And the related instruction mirrors this. So every 2,000 hours, you need a minimum of 144 hours. For us, on average, it's about 150 hours. This is where we built with some of the existing systems. So deconstruction technician, again, the hours vary based on which one, but historic preservation fundamentals, for 2 years, it's 90 hours. Historic window technician, 75. Preservation carpenter, 135. And similarly, the classes within each category change a little bit. So let's look at building systems again for each of these. A deconstruction technician has 90 hours in building systems where they learn about windows, doors, millwork, and the carpentry of buildings. A historic window technician will spend 120 hours on windows, doors, millwork, carpentry of buildings, weatherization, and framing. Preservation carpenter will spend 150 hours on windows, doors, millwork, carpentry of buildings, roofing, and framing. And these are as broad as the categories get. So as long as we can show with our related instruction partners that they gain the competencies and knowledge in these classes, they can be a part of our program. So now let's get into what those 2 categories of training partners are: pre-apprenticeship program and related instruction provider. Pre-apprenticeship programs are designed to prepare individuals to enter and succeed in a registered apprenticeship program. They provide their graduates with advanced standing in a registered apprenticeship program. And the Department of Labor has 6 factors that they call best practices for pre-apprenticeship programs. As I mentioned, they don't regulate it currently. It seems by setting up the practices they may in the future. So we still want to go by what these best practices are, and anybody that wants to partner, we want to go through this and also help them get to this point too if they're not already. So the 6 features are a simulated experience, hands-on training or volunteer opportunities that do not displace paid employees. And I think that's really key. A lot of people think that I can't afford to hire an expert in this, so I want to do a training program. All these programs should not be doing that. And it's not a good way to get your project done either. It's generally more expensive and higher risk because you have people who don't know what they're doing working on your project. So these training experience should be more focused on building the skills rather than like a project outcome necessarily. Approved curriculum. So training based on industry standards and approved by us. So that's what we mentioned earlier. We would look at what you provide for the training in the curriculum and see where it fits in. If you're going to be teaching like vinyl window replacement, you're not going to be a part of the program. Facilitated entry. So that's an agreement with a RAP sponsor, that would be us, where your program participants would enter directly into a registered apprenticeship program. So if you have a graduate coming out and they complete it, they can be approved into our program and we would place them with an employee. Increase diversity. Recruit and prepare for underrepresented populations to be successful in a registered apprenticeship program. So one of the other functions is to help more people get into the career field that otherwise wouldn't be able to or don't have the access to get into it. Support services are a part of that. It's also known as wraparound services, but they're there to help build equity and help participants complete a program. We do want some level of discretion who comes into the field because these are skilled trades and they're not for everybody. So there needs to be some built-in things where people have to earn the credentials to progress through. That said, we don't want things unrelated to credentialing to keep people from completing the program. So that's things like childcare, transportation, food stamps, tuition. If there are support services to help this, pardon me, sorry, I got a button. Okay. Sorry, I had a random button come up. Pardon me. So the support services help build that equity and make sure that people who want to be in the program and should be in the program can stay in the program. And then sustainable partnerships, collaborate with partners to promote those registered apprenticeship programs, work with employers and support trainees. And this is where we really want to come in. There are already existing programs. A lot of the time, they're pretty short-staffed. You know, it's a lot of people take on a lot of roles on these pre-apprenticeship programs. So that's where we can come in and making those connections with employers and helping follow up with the trainees. So those are pre-apprenticeship programs. The other part about advanced standing, if you're in a pre-apprenticeship program or you have one and it's 6 months, we take a look at it and say, these 6 months apply to these apprenticeship programs. That means the graduates in the program, once they get into the apprenticeship, can start with 6 months advanced standing. So rather than a 3-year program, they now only have 2.5 years to complete until they get to their certificate. So that's the other benefit of working with a registered apprenticeship program is you can help them towards that certification. Related instruction. Pardon me, wrong way. Related instruction providers. Pretty self-explanatory. They provide the related instruction. Well, we had outlined who has those classes and can provide them to apprentices. The related instruction can happen in bulk before or towards the end of an apprenticeship, although that's not super helpful. We would want it at least before, but some has to take place during as well. So related instruction providers are approved by us, the registrar or the sponsor of the program. And it can be a combination of community colleges, technical schools, workforce development training. It can be built by us. It can be from the employers themselves. A lot of employers we talk to say, well, I already have some of the training in place. We would just need to see that curriculum or an agenda, see how many hours, what are the competencies, and then we can approve it to be a part of it. Essentially, we just need to make sure that it aligns with those related instruction hours, and then we submit it to be approved by the Department of Labor. We already have these providers approved by the Department of Labor. It includes us, American Red Cross for First Aid, Belmont Community College, EPA's LeadSafe RRP approved instructors, National Safety Council, also First Aid, Clatsop Community College, OSHA, there's OSHA 30 and OSHA 10, so those approved providers, American College of Building Arts, the National Park Service Historic Preservation Training Center with their workshop series, the Khan Academy provides some of the baseline stuff in math and history and reading literacy. I put the National Safety Council twice. Whoops. They're only approved once for first aid. And then Savannah Technical College. So all of these provide related instruction for the apprenticeship program. And functionally, they don't have to do anything different. It's just saying they have those classes and apprentices can take those classes to get those competencies. If anything, it's going to add some benefits, and we'll talk about that once we get to the why use it phase. There's going to be some overlap between each of these two. So for example, the American College of Building Arts requires its students every summer to do what they call externships, where they go and work with an employer and gain hands-on apprentice-like experience, essentially. Those apprentice hours, those externship hours, can count as a pre-apprenticeship and those on-the-job hours, right? But they also provide the related instruction. Similarly, most pre-apprenticeship programs provide some type of instruction, like tool safety, basics about preservation. So related instruction hours can also happen with pre-apprenticeship programs. So although these are two categories, there's some overlap in what they end up providing. And that's where just the individualized assessment of each program will need to come in and where we can add those hours for somebody coming into the program. Okay, so how to be involved in this. So if you want to become a provider or a pre-apprenticeship program, we need that information, primarily things like the syllabus or an agenda, so we can gauge how many hours and what are people learning and how does it correlate to the apprenticeship programs. Then we have a training partner intake form. It gathers some baseline information about your program that we can add to the list and help even direct people to. We have a lot of people looking for training and people who don't qualify with the minimum requirements for the apprenticeship. We want to direct to some of these programs so they can get into it and have that facilitated entry. So some of that information on our intake form gathers that information so we can place people with you, direct people to you, and help advertise for the program. Then we'll meet with you to discuss the details. Like I said, there's a lot of squishiness around how those hours can combine. So really we need to meet and talk through what that looks like. Then for related instruction providers, we approve and add it into our standards and get that sent to the Department of Labor. For pre-apprenticeship programs, we'll sign a Memorandum of Understanding saying that you're part of it and that, a few of those things, it's not a formal agreement, but it's some paperwork saying that you are one of our pre-apprenticeship providers. Okay, so looking forward into the program and our scale. In this upcoming year, we want to have 50 apprentices. This last year, we had a goal of 5 of working with our existing employers to register what we call incumbent employees. That's one of the methods. So we could, again, test the system, see where our plans met reality and where we need to make adjustments. We're still in progress with that and working with our employers. So we didn't meet our 5 goal by 2024, but I think we will in January. So it's pretty close. But we do want to scale it upwards. And a really big component of that is working with these with these training program partners. Talking with employers, there's some hesitation in bringing on employees with no experience because it's a big risk and it is a financial investment for an unknown if the person's going to stick around. And it's really important to have these programs because it's a good way to get some people baseline skills, but also curate that list and have people who really want to be in there. Like they've already proven themselves, they're still interested and they want to be in the program. So this is a way to help employers get more reliable apprentices and employees in the system. And once we reach that scale, it becomes more financially feasible. As a program administrator or sponsor in a group program, once you reach that scale, the cost per apprentice goes down. And this is just the administrative cost for an apprentice, not the wages going to an apprentice. In a small program of about 100 people, it costs almost $9,000 per apprentice to administer all of these things. On a large one, over 1,000 apprentices, it goes a little bit below 4,000. What we're realistically looking at is around 100 to 200, I think, in the next few years. And that'll hit the average about 5,000. So what we've been trying to do, we have a very big portfolio of funding asks that we go at every single year. And what we want to do with a lot of these partnerships is go for bigger asks to help support this, but also support these pre-apprenticeship and related instruction programs. There are a lot of incentives for that collaboration, both federally, but also with private and philanthropic funders. So that's the goal we're going for, because a lot of, if you're a pre-apprenticeship program, you don't have wraparound services, there's an investment into that. And we want to have more people in the field and retain more people. So that can be a method that we can help support as well. So in joining the program, you could be a part of those bigger funding asks, and hopefully we can get some funding to help everybody out in their programs. Nope, I went backwards and I meant forwards. Apologies. What this would go towards on us and our goal structure to have for the organization are 5 different positions to help different aspects of the apprenticeship. Currently, we have a recruitment and outreach manager. So they're out developing all of this recruitment material, career information, making connections with schools and young people, presentations, career fairs, and working with other partners to just get information out about the historic trades and training opportunities. A goal position, apprentice navigator. So we want to have somebody very specifically, after somebody applies and gets approved, what are those next steps? The graduates of your program, how do we get them placed into the apprenticeship program and with an employer, and make sure the reporting happens and that they're getting the training they need on the job? Another goal position is a training navigator. So say you're interested in this, you don't have these components, you need help with curriculum or instructors. Our goal position is to have a training navigator that can help with that, help you get qualified for this, help you find those support services, help with those funding asks, help find the instructors and curriculum, all of that. Training coordinator we have currently to develop and deploy training resources for training. So that includes sending out some of those instructors, setting up workshops, helping employers get the training they need. And then another goal position is employer navigator. All of this can't exist unless we have a roster of employers willing and able to sign up apprentices and employ them. And a lot of them aren't necessarily prepared for that, who are interested too. There's a lot of that back end work that needs to go to get them prepared to take on an apprentice. So employer navigator would not only help with that, but help find new employers and make sure that they have the resources to train the apprentices accordingly. So this is our goal organizational structure if we get it all the way up the way we want. So everything I've described requires a lot more paperwork. And I have been asked by employers before okay, well, I'm already doing training, so why would I use this system? And there's a lot of proven benefits specifically to to registered apprenticeship programs. For employers, there's proven benefits for productivity and profitability. An apprentice is an employee. And so once you hire them and train them, 90% of them stay on when they're done. So if you have a 4-year apprenticeship, they're going to stay on afterwards still. So it reduces that turnover, but also the training program makes them more productive and reliable. There's also incentives available. What I mentioned earlier about those states, different states have different incentives to help employers take on those apprentices. That's a big incentive for a lot of them because it is a risk to take on. For employees, as an apprentice coming in, there's transparency in training, job expectations, and wage progression. This is a really important equity point, especially for people who are non-traditional to the field. They provide these trainees with immediate income and on-the-job learning and instruction. It's not an either-or scenario. And the alignment with the community colleges means that it's not an either college or apprentice or employment scenario either. On average, graduates earn $300,000 more over their career when compared to peers who are not in a registered apprenticeship program. And for industry, this is an articulatable but flexible training model. As you can see, there's very general what you should learn. The how can still be up to these different training programs, and there's flexibility even in those hours. It can change up to 25% because, again, project-based learning is not so structured that you can guarantee certain things happen. It also helps serve individuals who've been historically underserved, particularly in construction. The alignment with these federal standards can also facilitate regulatory benefits and leverage new funding sources for the stakeholders. As I mentioned, there's a lot of Department of Labor funding out there if you're a registered pre-apprenticeship program or a registered apprenticeship program or a provider of that related instruction, particularly for colleges. Okay, so I mentioned quite a bit. There's tons of information. The work process schedules I mentioned are different for each occupation. We just got our website updated with all of that. So if you want to look at all of those and learn more about those apprenticeship programs and some of these facts, you can visit historictrades.org/apprenticeships, as well as our career information page to look at each of those careers and see where you can line up. We also have the American Historic Trades Summit. So that is for training and education programs that are interested in this or looking for support or guidance in their training programs. That'll be April 7th through 9th in Chicago, Illinois. And then we also have our newsletter. So we have other opportunities where maybe you're not quite ready for this. We do want to engage more partners in that outreach and that recruitment side of it too. So if you're interested in maybe joining onto those, we'll be announcing them in our newsletter, as well as other updates like new occupations coming out. So I did want to point those out as next steps, but now I also want to open it up to questions. I'm going to take a breath and a little drink of water. And I saw there's a couple in the chat, so I'll start with those. But if anybody else has questions after going through all of that, you can type it in the chat, or if you want to come off mute after I go through those couple of questions, we can also talk through them. Okay. So Stacy asks, is this program for Maryland only? No, and that's a great question. It is a national program. Half of our participating employers actually are based in Maryland, one's in North Carolina and one's in Georgia. We've been talking to others across the country. If you want to go through our program with us as a sponsor, all of that will go through the state of Maryland, but it's still applicable to your state. If you wanted to become the sponsor of a program and do this all yourself, you can. We have the national guidelines for apprenticeship standards on our website. You can take those and go to your Department of Labor office, whether it's a state apprenticeship agency or the Office of Apprenticeship, and get them registered in your own state. You wouldn't be part of our program, but you can use those standards that we established. So not for Maryland only, but it'll be funneled through the Maryland or State Apprenticeship Agency with us. And then Molly asks, over what time period does the one-to-one apply? And please correct me if I get this wrong, Molly. The one-to-one is that ratio of apprentice to journey worker. This is just for the duration of the apprenticeship. So if that apprentice is going into the employer, they're hired by one of our employers, that full time they need to complete their apprenticeship needs to be the one-on-one. This is not the case for pre-apprenticeship programs or the related instruction. And I apologize, I did not clarify that when I was talking about them. That is not a requirement if you're in a pre-apprenticeship program. That can be a class-based structure with, one instructor and 10 students or 10 trainees. Same with related instruction providers. There's no way it could be a one-to-one in a classroom-based setting. If only we were funded that well with education, right? So yes, you can have one instructor to a number of students as well. That said, if we were finding out a pre-apprenticeship program had one instructor for 50 trainees, we would probably question whether or not that would qualify for this, because I would wonder if they were getting that meaningful on-the-job training with that ratio. But the one-to-one does not apply for pre-apprenticeships or for related instruction providers. And please correct me if I misinterpreted your question, Molly.
You got it. And I think as you move to the presentation, it made more sense. I was just kind of thinking with the journeyman having different skill levels. I didn't know if they could kind of pipeline people through, but it sounds like it's just when you're committed to that apprentice, you commit to that one-to-one mentorship until that person is certified or leaves the apprenticeship. Is that correct?
Yes, as an employer, and the journey person can also change, right? So what you're saying, if there's somebody with more specialty, Windows, I think, is a good example because there can be a lot of shop-based work. There can also be a lot of site-based work. So, sorry, let me scooch over. Somebody just joined. So if you needed training with somebody on the site-based work and then training with somebody in the shop, as long as it's still a journey person and it's that one-to-one ratio, it still counts. So it doesn't have to be the same journey worker across the board, as long as that ratio is maintained.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. And then Stacy, your follow-up, do you have programming in NYC and Northern New Jersey? We don't have any active programming right now, but again, these are available to be used in those areas. So if you're based in New York City and you want to use one of these apprenticeships, we can sign up one of the participating employers for that. We can also get you qualified as one of those pre-apprenticeship programs. And same with Northern New Jersey. That said, we don't have like specific instructors living there at this point, but we can also help develop that. We do want to increase the number of instructors that we have, and we have an instructor training program. One of the biggest costs about sending them out right now is travel. So we want to have more readily available in different areas so it's less for a travel cost. Did I answer your question? Good. Okay. Great, great, great. Okay. Any other questions? And you can come off mute if you'd like to, or if there's any points that you would like clarification on.
So this is Molly again, sorry. So in thinking about this and walking it out, so if we established a pre-apprenticeship, for example, and wanted to connect to apprenticeships in preservation carpentry, for example, currently we don't have identified employers that are working on figuring out how that might work in the area. And we're based in Mississippi and working with Tulane, like the Gulf Coast, basically on
Perfect.
state programs. So thinking about that, who identifies the employers, and then how do we piece this together? Would you individually work with this program, kind of know, because we have some funding opportunity coming up to think about creating some of these
Mhm.
apprenticeships or and partnering with related instructor types that you
Right.
described.
Right. We would be interested in helping find those in the area. And that's part of like some of the outreach that we want to do. We mentioned the recruitment for apprentices. We also really do need to do that recruitment for employers because a lot of them don't necessarily know that they can use an apprenticeship or have some, they just don't know about the systems and how it can apply to them. So we'd be happy to help find some in the area and meet with them and talk through. Um, that said, too, it's not a requirement to stay in the areas of where the employer is. So if you have somebody going through the program, they could end up going to work with somebody in Illinois, for example. But a lot of pre-apprenticeship programs, rightfully so, are invested in developing a local workforce. So you can still have the pre-apprenticeship program even without employers in the area. But for this cert, like if the goal is to help the area, we could help try and find and talk to those potential participating employers to get them signed on.
Thanks. And then just the other, when you were mentioning the funding, we're a state level agency, but we're preparing our federal level asks
Oh, yeah,
um,
yeah.
currently. So I think you were saying kind of build some of those pieces together. So if you want to talk more about that, we're preparing those now.
Absolutely. Okay, yes, please. Yeah, we've gone for a few, and I think that our missing link is usually the partnerships at that national scale, because the federal ones usually want to show a very big impact. And even if it's a big impact for an area, they're looking for, almost thousands type of impact level. So by being in these partnerships, it can really help some of those asks to show the impact and outcomes that can come from it. So yes, I'd be happy to talk with you more about that and where we can help each other out. Excellent. Does anybody else have questions about the apprenticeships becoming one of our training partners or any clarification needed on anything in this? We'll give it a couple minutes, see if anybody adds to the chat. Well, I'm not seeing any come through. I'll talk just a little bit longer in case somebody's typing one out. But as I mentioned, great follow-ups. If you all want to learn more, or if you want to look at that training and education intake form that we have, like I said, it's just getting program information about what you're doing so we can also help promote it and funnel people to it. In terms of what it means for you after the fact, the only other maybe added component would be we want to keep up with the reporting and tracking information, again, for some of these funding asks to show the efficacy of these training programs and these partnerships. So after becoming a partner, we would just need some annual reporting on number of participants and outcomes and demographics and things like that. That'll really help us in those funding asks and, like I said, with efficacy. Otherwise, operationally, it really shouldn't change too much. And if anything, we can help, get you with an instructor, sync up your graduates to these employment opportunities or some of these networking opportunities. But I did forget to mention that, and I think it's pretty important to know that operationally, it really shouldn't change too much for you. But it does have to have the capacity to keep up with this on the reporting end. All right. Well, thank you all so much. As I mentioned, this is being recorded, so you can also come back to it. We have all that information on our website now at apprenticeships and also career information. So you can follow up to both of those, and please sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date. And hopefully you can join us too at the American Historic Trade Summit and learn more about some of these systems. So thank you everybody so much for joining.